Hi, everybody. I'm Nick from Basketball Network, and today I'm happy to introduce you to Pops Mensah-Bonsu. Pops, really thank you for joining the call today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I would say as the current postseason is quite active, I hope you have time to catch some of the games. I really try to. I just wanted to ask who's your current favorite. I would say looking at all the injury to Jason Tatum that happened and what happened last night between Denver and OKC.
I'm going with the New York Knicks. I'm sticking with the home team. That's who I recently worked for and still work for in a consultant capacity. So I think the Knicks, with sadly the injury to Jason Tatum, you have to look at the Knicks as favorites to get out of the East, and I like their chances on whoever they would play in the West too.
Okay. I really like the matchup. I would say that we'll be looking, I would say, in the East between the Pacers and the Knicks, given the history of it, but also I would say the play styles between the teams. I think it will be quite interesting matchup and must-see games for everybody. And I would say the other question that I had for you, this season we had really closely competitive MVP battle between SG and Jokic. Who do you think, in your opinion, was the true MVP of the regular season?
Who was the two MVPs, or who was the MVP?
Who do you think is the MVP?
I think similar to LeBron, Jokic, and the likes of Jokic and Giannis, they have MVP caliber seasons whenever they step on the floor. I think we've gotten some, not fatigue, but we've gotten so used to Jokic putting up these insane numbers that he's unfairly judged by it because it's what he does normally. I do feel like if we're talking regular season, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander should be the favorite this year with the 30-point games that he had, the streak of 20-point games, best team in the NBA, number one overall seed. I know some people find it difficult to isolate regular season from how things happen in the playoffs, but it's a regular season award, so I'll give it to SGA this year.
Okay, great, thank you. I would say I would start at the beginning of your professional career. It's quite interesting that you're, I would say, native of Great Britain, and Great Britain is known for football or soccer, however you want to call it. So how come, when did you, I would say, first fell in love with basketball, and how did your, I would say, basketball journey started?
Wow. So I vividly remember the 1992 Dream Team. Sometimes I guess it becomes cliche. That's a lot of people's first memories of basketball. But my oldest brother, he moved to the United States in the early 90s to play basketball. He was a soccer player, similar to me, and I ran track also. But he was a soccer player, and then just discovered basketball and immediately found a niche and a love for the game, and was able to get a scholarship to move to the United States. And him being my older brother, he was somebody I had always looked up to and always modeled my path after. So when he started playing basketball, that's when my love for the game started to develop and evolve. And once I saw the Dream Team and then started playing right around 12 years old, I immediately fell in love. I was more of a natural track athlete, but basketball was so engaging to me on the floor, and I loved the culture. I loved the magazines, the sneakers, just everything about the game, and I wanted to be a part of it. That it just I was consumed with it. Moving to the United States, getting a chance to go to school, and hopefully one day get an opportunity to play in the NBA became a dream of mine.
Oh, nice. You said you got a scholarship for the US. You went to George Washington University. You spent all 4 years. I would say you played in a really great era of, I would say, NCAA. So what are maybe one of your fondest memories about that time? You had really good, I would say, college career. So what are some things that you most remember?
I would have to say I would have to culminate the whole 4 years in one to say what my fondest memory was, because there were a few of them, as you can imagine. But I would say, when I got to George Washington as a freshman in 2002, we were dubbed the worst team in the Atlantic 10 Conference. Barely had a couple hundred people at our games. I remember inviting a girl that I liked to one of my games, and she laughed at me and said, "Why? You guys suck." Fast forward to my junior year, just 2 short years later, we were nationally ranked, and students were lining up outside of our arena 3 hours before the game just to get a seat. And I think that transition from being, a bottom tier team to not only being the best team in the conference, but one of the best teams in all of college basketball, was probably my fondest memory of being at GW. And I often tell players that, the cream always rises to the top. You don't have to necessarily go to a big school or a major program to get that notoriety. Like, if you put the work in and you lace them up the same way as everybody else and compete, then things will come to fruition. And that's what happened while we were at GW.
Okay. And can I ask, maybe piggyback to the previous question on you coming from the UK? Was it a big shock, not in a cultural language barrier, but I would say the way they approach basketball compared to maybe where you're playing in London?
I wouldn't say it was not necessarily a culture shock. It was because I embraced it. This is what I wanted. This is what I wanted to be a part of. So that shock of it was received positively. It was just the adjustment. It was just the adjustment of playing at that level, competing at that level, and it was a big adjustment for me because I was still new to the game of basketball and hadn't really played organized basketball before, and I was still finding out about who I was as a player, and my body was evolving. I was growing, and my skills were beginning to catch up with my athleticism. My athleticism allowed me to keep up with, my peers who were far more advanced than I was. They started the game years before me, and it forced me to work harder when I got into the gym and, in the weight room. And it's what pushed me to work harder, because it allowed me to allow my skills to finally catch up with my athleticism. And, by the time I was a sophomore, junior at George Washington, I feel like I had, finally reached a point where I could compete with my peers, not just athletically, but skill-wise too.
And did you think that maybe staying in Europe would have, I would say, or did you even consider staying in Europe when you were close to 18, like trying to find that, like in Europe, it's mostly professional clubs. So around 18, after you finish your junior years, then you actually become a senior, and then you start playing professional. Did you have, I would say, any opportunities to do something like that? Or I would say NCAA was always your goal, given that you mentioned that you had an older brother who went to play there, do you think that would change, I would say, how your career actually would go on?
That's a really interesting question, Nick. My junior year, actually, I entered the draft. I entered the NBA draft. I always, my college career went through some progressions. I wanted to at least get a college scholarship. I was able to do that. Once I got there, I wanted to start. I was able to start as a freshman. Then I challenged myself to become one of the better players in the conference. I was most improved player my sophomore year. And then my junior year, I challenged myself to trying to become one of the best players in the country. And by the time I was end of my junior year, I was, people were talking about me entering the NBA draft. I said all that to say my junior year, I entered the draft, and I remember getting a call from a team in Spain telling me that they were going to pay me a large amount of money to leave school to go play in Spain with this young Brazilian phenom who was probably going to be a lottery pick in the next couple of years, and they wanted us to play together. But that was in 2005, and in 2000 back then, if you took money or left school early, you lost your amateur status. There was no NIL, there was no anything like that. So, and you didn't leave school back then to become a second round pick. So I was, being 21 years old, I was a little nervous to make that kind of decision, that was going to ultimately alter my my professional career. And I decided not to take the money and go play with Europe. In Europe, it turns out the player was Thiago Splitter. Yeah,
I had you in mind, to be honest. I have to say,
Huh?
because given it, I would say age and everything, I was like probably like Splitter. I know that Nene was maybe a bit older.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it was Thiago Splitter, and it was just a really big decision for me. And I was testing the waters. I wasn't a solidified draft pick. I wasn't in position to kind of determine my future in that sense. I like to think with my competitiveness and my drive that had I taken that path, things still would have worked out. But I was going the safe route. I ended the draft. I got to see where my level of play and my skill set matched up with some of the best players in the country, and I think it propelled me to having a great senior season. So that was the one time I actually considered taking the European route, but I think it was always NCAA for me. Coming from the UK, like you said, it's a country that its primary sport is soccer, and you don't really have the academy system when it comes to basketball. That is something that happens in mainland Europe. So that option wasn't really there for me at a young age. So once I got to college, that was always going to be my path.
Okay. And now talking about college, you mentioned also NIL. Do you think that your college experience would have been much different in the NIL era?
Most definitely. My experience definitely would have been very different. I like to think I would have benefited from NIL, and even though I was an international student, I definitely feel like I would have been able to take advantage of that. Not only my on-court play, but my personality off the court would have been engaging enough to warrant some significant NIL. So, and it would have been interesting too with the transfer portal. It's funny enough, not too many people know this. I almost transferred my sophomore year to another school at GW, but back then you would have to sit out a year when you transferred. So if you transferred, it was for good reason, and it came at a cost too. Now you can bounce around and play at 4 or 5 schools during your college career, and I do think it waters the college game down somewhat with players being able to just get up and leave as they see fit. But at the same time, I'm sure there's benefits to it also. But I do think I would have benefited from playing in the NIL era.
So do you think that it's ultimately helping young players, or it's adding pressure? I think that the NCAA is in a peculiar position with the NIL because you gave, I would say, a lot of empowerment to the players, which is, I would say, a positive. But if everybody is, I would say, a 1-year rental at their school, it's tough to build, I would say, really strong college programs. It will be much harder to build, I would say, long-term strong college programs now that, even though you sign somebody who was ESPN top 100, he can leave next year because some other school would offer him 5 times NIL deal that you offer him as a freshman, and then you have this issue.
Yeah, that's the part I was saying that waters down the college game. I'm all for players getting compensated for what they have brought to the NCAA. NCAA is a $1 billion industry. NCAA sports or collegiate sports is a $1 billion industry, whether it's American football or basketball or soccer, what have you. It still brings in and generates a large sum of money for these institutions and the NCAA. So it's only right that the players get compensated. Where it can get oversaturated is that, you're paying for their name, image, and likeness. You're not paying for play. The money that they get is contingent on their name, their image, and their likeness, not performance, none of that. And that's where the lines can get blurred. It can get a little, it can get a little tricky. Now, I've seen some players who signed NIL deals, gotten a portion of the money and just up and transferred. And, there's been discrepancies around, well, they left before they played. Well, the thing is, you didn't pay for their play. You paid for their name, image, and likeness. And so I do think it can be a gift and a curse. Like I said, these players need to get compensated for the revenue that they generate for these institutions. And but at the same time, it does make the college game a little fickle, I would say, because you see a player one year he's playing for Robert Morris, and then the next year he's playing for Pittsburgh, and then all of a sudden he's at Kentucky. I remember interviewing some players for the draft just last year, and I couldn't keep up with the player because he had went to 5 different schools. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to get a gauge for who this player is, and their personality. If you play for 5 different schools, each coach could say something different. And for us to do our background on the player's personality and his work ethic and his ability on the court, it's difficult to do that if they bounce around every year. So that makes it difficult from an evaluation standpoint. I also think it makes it difficult for when it comes to adversity. This generation of players, I think the transfer portal gives them an easy way out.
Sorry to cut you. One thing that triggered me was actually you said that you did interviews with players that I would say went to 5 schools. Is I would say this transfer portal then affecting how you mentioned that you work as a consultant for the New York Knicks? Does that affect, I would say, now these changes with the NIL and transfer portal? Does this affect, as we are now, yesterday was the draft lottery, is this in any way affecting how the NBA teams in general are now approaching the whole draft process and looking at the, maybe not Cooper Flags of the world, who everybody knew regardless of the NIL would be one and done, but players who spent several years on college, if you look at, I would say, outside of basketball, when you start working, if you change jobs quite often, everybody thinks that you maybe are not so loyal or something like that. Does the NBA scouts and NBA consultants, do you, I would say, approach it now a bit differently when you're evaluating talent?
We have to dig deeper. We have to make sure we've done our due diligence on these players, and if they have gone to 5 schools, you need to speak to all 5 of those coaches, their academic advisors, and really dig deep into their background because of that. And you have to be good at your job when it comes to evaluating these players, because I think it's a challenge when, a player is going to 5 different schools. I think it's more so a challenge on the personality and character side. When we're doing our background on the player, we want to make sure, there's eyes, ears, and numbers. Eyes is you go watch a player play and he fits the bill. Then you do the ears is the background check. You go look into, his high school coach, his girlfriend, his family background, his character when he was in school, and then the numbers, you add those up. But with the volatility of college basketball and players going to all these different schools and transferring, it does make it more difficult. But on the character side, I think that's where the biggest challenge comes in, because you're going to get a number of different responses when it comes to that. And so you're taking a chance on somebody that you're going to invest millions of dollars into. So that's the part I think that affects on the pro level. But at the same time, we do our due diligence and do go above and beyond to make sure we're choosing the right fit for a team.
And then maybe to conclude discussion about college would be, do you think now with the NIL, maybe the NBA should alter the rule? When discussing, I would say, with my colleagues and I would say other basketball enthusiasts, I always think now with the NIL in place, it's not so much that players want to go pro just because of the contract, because through NIL, they can, especially I would say the top talent, can really get lucrative deals. I was thinking that maybe now would be a good time to add that maybe you need to be a sophomore before you can potentially apply to the NBA draft. Or you think that is not something that the NBA wants, something that the NCAA doesn't want, or you think that is not necessary for pros?
I thought you was going to go the other way and say they were going to get rid of the one and done rule altogether, because they add another year, then you're going to just find players. I was in the era where, Brandon Jennings and, some other players left high school early to go play overseas. If you tell them they have to go to 2 years of college before they go pro, you're going to see players taking alternate routes. And then, a player like Cooper Flag, he might stay 4 years because he's making all this money at Duke. And it's probably going to continue to grow with his performance, that they'd be like, well, if I've already done 2 years, why not just, do 2 more, do another year? So I personally think the one and done rule should be scrapped, because we're just protecting NBA teams from themselves. You do your homework and draft the right way. I do feel like, those players, will develop and reach their full potential. Baseball, Microsoft, I'm sure Google, they can go to these high schools and get these talented individuals and from high school. Now you're telling me that the NBA, you can't come to the NBA out of high school if you're worthy and able. I do feel like that they should scrap that one and done rule, because I just think it doesn't do much. It really doesn't do much. The 1 year, it could probably help with, some discipline or some, basketball development on the court. But at the same time, if Cooper Flag was going to go number 1 last year or this year, or whether he did 1 year at Duke. So, the Zion Williamses of the world, a lot of these players who are going to go in the top tier were still probably going to do so had they not gone to college. So, I feel like allow those players to enter the draft from high school if they want to. And the NBA teams are going to be challenged with making sure that they're going to make the right decision.
Yeah, and actually, regarding the one and done rule, I would say that they always say there were a lot of flops from high school. But if we look at the overall number, I would say percentage-wise, there's similar number of great stars from college. And if you look at just the percentage at the end of the day, at the bottom line, when you compare college top draft picks and top high school draft picks, which one of them became stars, which one of them became flops. So I would say I agree on that level, but that was why I'm saying about 2 years is because you have NCAA is also maybe profiting a bit more from there, because you have 2 years of these great talents, and then you constantly have, I would say, even more influx, because you're still at the end of the day giving them something that they were all fighting for years, and that is to earn some money while playing college.
Why does the NCAA need to profit any more than they already do? Doing 2 years.
Okay.
We just, what I'm saying? It's already $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
March Madness generates billions of dollars. The NCAA, the BCS football championship, the college playoff for football generates billions of dollars. Like, them forcing players to stay another year is, to me, seemingly greedy. They're not doing it for the benefit of the players. They're doing it so you can have Cooper Flag in a Duke uniform for 2 years.
Yeah.
And I do feel like it's going to have an adverse effect. You keep putting these parameters in place, the system is going to find a way to find its way around it. The players, the people, the stakeholders are going to find their way around it. So, I just think it should be fair game. If you think you're worthy to leave from high school, you can enter the draft. If the teams think you're worthy, they'll draft you. It's all about doing our job and doing our due diligence. I think that one and done rule is just a rule to protect the NCAA and protect the NBA. It's not about protecting the players whatsoever.
Yeah, in coming to I would say draft at the end of your, I would say, collegiate career, you again, I would say, went to NBA draft. You were undrafted, and then you had to take the path of summer leagues and 10-day contracts, and I would say fighting for a roster spot. I wanted to ask you, I would say, given that summer league at that time was relatively in the beginning, in the early 2000s, so what was your experience on the summer league and stuff like that? Was it quite competitive? Was it big different? I would say when you compare NCAA in your senior year competing on the summer league. Well,
Yeah, it was very different because although you're playing against some of your collegiate peers, now you're playing against everybody's a professional athlete now, and the game is faster. The decisions you have to make on the court are quicker. Everybody is athletic. Although I feel like I was the best athlete on the floor, whatever team I played on. When I got to the NBA, there were more athletes like me. So, being able trying to stand out in that sense was a little more difficult because there's so many great athletes. And for me, it was a rude awakening. I had never been to Las Vegas before. It was my first experience there. I'm trying to make this team. I go undrafted, but luckily, I was laser focused on getting to the NBA. So, regardless of the distractions that come with the NBA and the summer league in Las Vegas, I was focused on making sure I did what I had to do on the court, and being able to get signed from summer league was something of a rarity back then in 2006, and you didn't see it happen too often. Now these things happen all the time, but I was one of a few players to sign a guaranteed contract during summer league that hadn't really been done in that way before, and it was due to me wanting to get drafted. I wanted to get drafted, being of Ghanaian descent and British born. I wanted to show those who look like me that it's possible, and be an inspiration to a younger generation and give them a figurehead and an image of success. And unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. So I think it's what built a level of determination in me and fire in me that kind of propelled me into my professional career, because I ended up becoming an avid rebounder. I worked to become a star in my role as a defensive player, a rebounder, an athlete, and a finisher. And I challenged myself to be the best at those things while I was on the court. And I often tell players that's what allowed me to play in the NBA. I focus on the things that some players don't find as glamorous and or as sexy. And I wouldn't say I mastered them, but I became an expert in rebounding and defense, and I took pride in it. And those things that every team needs players like. So it definitely motivated me. I wish I would have gotten drafted to have that inspiration on those players that look like me, but it didn't happen that way. And it did light a fire in me and moving forward in my career though.
Do you think that you were given, I would say, proper chance? I would say at the beginning you had stints, I would say, with Dallas. Then there was also Toronto, San Antonio. And then you, of course, went overseas. But do you think that you were given, I would say, good chance to succeed in the NBA as, I would say, young guy?
If you were to have asked me in 2010 that same question, I would have told you no. But putting things in perspective, I was there. I was an established NBA player. I was on the court. I had opportunities, whether they were opportunities that they were, significant opportunities, or ones that, allowed me to put me in a position to succeed. That remains to be seen. I always say, like I said before, the cream always rises to the top. I was there. Sometimes, when opportunities presented themselves, whether I was ready or not was the question. So I'm happy with my path and how my career went. I wouldn't change anything. It made me who I am today. And, had I done things differently, I would have just made different mistakes. Yeah. So, I'm definitely happy and grateful for the opportunities that I had in the NBA.
Yeah, I can agree. Maybe I would say your NBA career played on Toronto Raptors. That they were, I remember, they were quite international team. I remember being, I would say, a kid
Very.
at that time, reading in a basketball magazine about, I would say, how Toronto Raptors, first of all, drafting Andrea Bargnani, they had already Chris Bosh, then adding Jose Garbajosa, Jose Calderon. Then it was also Parker, who played in, I would say, CSKA Moscow, and he had this, I would say, European background. So it was quite an international team, which was at that time quite rare, and they played quite modern basketball in a way. There was a lot of spacing. There was a big man shooting. Did you think that during that time, I would say, everybody playing 5 out, big men's being, I would say, requested to shoot threes would be something that would come into the NBA, or you thought that Toronto was, I would say, unique in a way?
Well, I started my career playing with Dirk Nowitzki, and so seeing a big man, the 7-footer, shooting threes wasn't uncommon to me. And whether it was going to take on in the NBA, that also remained to be seen. But you could see the trend, you could see the direction the league was going in. There was, they're starting to look for these players who were in the front court, or power forwards or centers that could also stretch the floor, which added another dynamic to the game. And now it's become customary that all players on the court 1 through 5 are able to shoot. I remember, when I would train before the games, they wouldn't even let me take jump shots before, because they wanted big men to focus on being big men. You rebound, you play defense, you run the floor, you finish around the basket. And they didn't want, for many players, especially outside of Dirk, doing all of that. Now they now they push it. Now they're hoping that their bigs can add that piece to the game to spread the floor out and open it for guys like Jalen Brunson or Anthony Edwards, who attack the basket and try to get in the paint. If you got a big man like Karl Anthony Towns who can spread the floor, that makes the game a lot easier and spreads the floor. So it was a very international team. I like to think that Andrea Bargnani and the likes of Chris Bosh were pioneers when it came to that style of play. And I think it became apparent when Chris Bosh was in Miami and they played against the Indiana Pacers, and he had an injury. And we saw what, as great as LeBron and Dwayne Wade are, we saw what happened with the lack of the presence of Chris Bosh. And it was them not having to focus on a big that could hit a three. When he was out, they could shrink the floor and make it more difficult for the likes of Dwayne Wade and LeBron James to get to the basket. When he came back, we saw what a difference he made. And I think a lot of teams took notice to that too, similar to when Golden State won the NBA championship against the Cleveland Cavaliers the first time. The whole league followed the trend of playing small ball, finding an undersized big man who may have some skills to handle the ball, facilitate the offense, even hit jump shots. But you don't need a 7-footer. You can essentially play with 5 perimeter players, essentially. And that would allow for a faster game and allow for mismatches. I was in San Antonio at the time, and when the whole league was getting smaller and playing small ball, we got bigger. We signed 2 7-footers on our team, and I do think it had its effect on the NBA, both positively and negatively. But it's just all about, as far as teams are concerned, it's all about making sure you understand who you are as a team, and not trying to follow a trend and look like somebody else. Golden State perfected that. That's who they were. The likes of Memphis Grizzlies, who have Marc Gasol and Zach Randolph, you don't really, try to play small ball with those 2 interior players like that. So, I do think that time period was a pioneering one, and one that kind of created a change in the NBA, and one that we still see resonate to today.
Yeah, and I would say, you mentioned Chris Bosh. I know that you played with Dirk Nowitzki. You also played on San Antonio with Tim Duncan. But I would say, even when you came they were already considered to be future Hall of Famers. But Chris Bosh was relatively young. Did you see, I would say, or did you thought that he would have, I would say, that amazing of a career, and that he would be that impactful, that at the end of the day, he would have his jersey retired, he would be considered, I would say, one of the premier power forwards of his generation?
Absolutely. I mean, when I played with him, he was one of maybe 2 or 3 players in the NBA that averaged 25 points and 10 plus rebounds a game. And it's funny, when he went to Miami, his numbers went down. You know, he averaged 27 points, I believe, and 11 rebounds. And he goes to Miami, he averaged about 19 points and 8 rebounds. But that's where he's known. That's what people are known for. He won 2 titles there in Miami, you know, signed the big contracts and, you know, played there. But I think the platform is what opened everybody else's eyes. In Canada, you know, Chris Bosh is a god. You know, people love him. They love what he did for that team. He's one of the greatest Raptors ever. At one point, he probably was the greatest Raptor ever, up there with Vince Carter. But, you know, I always knew he would be a Hall of Famer in that right. But I think him going to Miami kind of solidified his career.
Yeah, I agree on that. And maybe who was? We always like to ask maybe some of these questions, like who was one of the guys that was probably the toughest matchup for you when you played?
Dirk Nowitzki, because I knew coming in, like I said, I was a defensive player, and I took pride in playing defense, and I always, you know, knew that Dirk. There was a time Dirk used to struggle with shorter, more athletic, physical players, and I used to try to use that to my advantage. I was 6'9", he was 7 feet tall, and I would try to get up underneath him and bother his shot. But, you know, it was a struggle. And there was one day in particular where I thought I was doing a really good job, and I caught myself talking trash. And he whispered to me and said, "I've been playing with my left hand the whole day." And I was like, "Oh, you get out of here!" And then the next play, he catches the ball and shoots a left-handed 3, and it goes in. And I was like, I just shook my head. And you know, that was the year he was MVP. So it not only opened my eyes to the levels to this game, but what it took to be the best player in the NBA. He would work out twice a day, every day, working on his shot, and it challenged me as an undrafted rookie that if the best player in the NBA does this, what do I have to do? And he was the most humble human at the same time too. So it was really a good example for me moving into my career, and it definitely helped how I interacted with fans and how I approached the game too.
Yep. And maybe I would say you mentioned, I would say, learning from Dirk. Like, are there any other players or maybe coaches that I would say took you under his wing when you were, I would say, rookie, or you're joining new teams? Is anybody who I would say you fondly remember helping you?
I mean, just seeing, looking at recent events, I would say Greg Popovich. I played for him in San Antonio. I also worked with him when I was a scout, and you know, I was only there for about a month, and they traded. I got traded to another team, but the education that I got from being around the likes of Greg Popovich, amongst Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker, was invaluable. You know, I remember I made a mistake in the game one time, and he took me out and, you know, told me a new one, yelled at me, and, you know, I thought I was never going to play again. And a few minutes later, Tim Duncan makes the exact same mistake. And Greg Popovich yelled at him maybe even yelled at him more so, and got on him even more. And Tim Duncan's response is what opened my eyes to why San Antonio has been as great as they were have been the gold standard of basketball for the last 2-3 decades. You know, he looked at coach in his eye and said, "You're right," and sat right next to me. But seeing how arguably the greatest power forward responds that way, but then also arguably the greatest coach that we've seen too, still hold all his players accountable in the same way, really warmed my heart to see from Greg Popovich's point of view, because I'm an undrafted rookie. They signed me on a 10-day contract. He didn't. He could have just cast me off, but I was on his team. He cared about every player. He treated all of us the same way, and really, I don't call Greg Popovich a coach. I just say he's a leader. If he's picking up trash or fixing cars or going to war, I'm running through a brick wall for him, because he leads, and those are the type of coaches I feel like have profound impact on your life. And similar to my childhood coach, he had an impact on my life that is going to be lasting.
Yeah, and I would say now moving to Europe back after I would say your stint in the NBA, you went to play in Europe. You played for some really premier European basketball clubs. I remember actually watching you several times when it was EuroLeague and stuff like that. You were originally, I would say, from Europe. You went to United States. You stayed there. Was it, I would say, again, a bit of shock going back to Europe, looking at, I would say, the standard of I would say, the way the guys train in the NBA, then going back to Europe? Was there, I would say, some learning curve for you? How did you, I would say, adjust again?
It was. I mean, you said it best. It was an adjustment. The learning curve was I had to adjust my skill set to be able to have the effect on the game physically, like I did in the NBA. They have rules, certain rules and FIBA rules, I would say, playing in Europe that would prohibit me from just outright being having a reckless abandon when it comes to my athleticism. I had to harness that my athleticism, my aggression, become more skilled when it came to my free throws and making sure I may not have been a stretch big man, a big man that shot the ball, but I knew I could affect the game in other ways, and had to become a star in my role to do so in Europe. So it wasn't more so a culture shock on the court. It was just more so adaptation, finding ways to adapt and finding parts of my game that would be advantageous in the European game. But I think playing in those different cultures in the different countries, I was fortunate enough to play in cities like Milan. I was in Barcelona. I was in Moscow. I was in Athens and Istanbul, and these are some of the best cities in the world. Yeah. And I got to play there. So one thing I did do was soak up that culture also, and soak up the people, the food, and it was really, it was really cool to experience. And I do feel like it had an impact on me and pushed me into my career after basketball.
Yeah. And maybe which season in Europe, I would say, you cherish the most? Which you think maybe you played your best basketball, or is it?
Or how many people are going to see this interview? Because if I choose the wrong one, I could be in trouble. Wow, that's a great question.
I would say, looking at your, I would say, resume, CSKA Moscow, I would say, of the all is like there was during your time when you played, they were always, I would say, fighting for EuroLeague finals. That is something that I always remember. Those teams with I don't know, like Matias Smodic, Ramona Šiškauskas, Stel Papalukas. He also played there. So there is a lot of great European players that you, I would say, played for CSKA Moscow. But what I would say, maybe then not maybe your favorite. Which season you're the most proud of when you look at your European career?
Which season I would say I was most proud of was my season in Turkey when I played for Beşiktaş. This for a number of reasons, personally and professionally. Personally, I had just came back from an injury. I had a total shoulder repair, and I was going to be had a total shoulder repair, and I was going to be out for almost a year. And this is in 2011, and the Olympics are coming up that next year. So not only was I on a tight schedule to get back to the court, but I had to be playing at a high level so that I could perform in the Olympics too. And so coming into that season in Turkey, my level of focus was was out of this world. You know, it was probably next to my season in Greece was probably my best individual season as a player. You know, I was MVP of the league, MVP of the Euro Cup, the defensive player of the year, you know, first team. We won. We did the triple. We won the Turkish league, the Turkish Cup, and the European League, which was, you know, teams don't often do that, as you know. So I would say my year in Turkey was my best. Was my best on and off the court.
Yeah, you mentioned Olympics. I would say, how did it feel to wear, I would say, the colors of your nation at the Olympics? Given, I would say at the beginning we mentioned it's not the most basketball famous nation.
Mm-hmm.
You also played in London, your home soil. So what was it? I would say one of the most, I would say, favorite moments of your career playing for the national team at the Olympics.
Man, it was a powerful experience. It was, you know, I often say, you know, getting a chance to play in the Olympics is an honor at any stage, but I got to play in the Olympics in my hometown, a few minutes, not far from where I was born, and having my parents, you know, my close friends and family getting a chance to see me as an Olympian playing, you know, a sport that, like you said, was relatively unknown for a while. You know, was amazing. And getting to run out, I think the initial moment when I ran out for that first game, or even the opening ceremony, when it became a reality that I was going to be, you know, that I'm an Olympian with the likes of Usain Bolt, Michael Phelps, Serena Williams, and being amongst the best of the best on the planet at the highest level was, you know, something that wasn't lost on me. And it's a moment that I cherish and relive every 4 years when the Olympics come back.
Yeah, I can imagine. And also, you played in a group, I would say, with Spain, who was, I would say, coming back from 2008 finals. They were again on a run. Were they, I would say, as amazing team as they looked up on the TV competing against them? Because, you know, all of them played through, I would say, 12 years old until, I would say, the seniors for the national team. Was it like really specific watching Pau Gasol? You saw him again in the NBA. Was it different Pau Gasol playing for the Spanish basketball for the Spanish basketball team, or similarly you played against a lot of Spanish guys who played on the national team in Europe? So were they, I would say, different animals when they competed for their nation?
Man, I'll tell you this: we played against the USA team, and obviously they were difficult to match up with and to guard. But I would say the Spanish team with Mark and Pau Gasol playing together were just as difficult to guard. They had this synergy between them, not only being brothers but being, you know, great players. The way they played, you know, made it really difficult to match up and guard with them. But funny enough, when the British team, we would give Spain problems. Like every time we played them, it was a single-digit game. You know, it actually came down to the wire a few times. I actually got hurt in that game in the Olympics, and, you know, like to have thought if I hadn't gotten hurt, you know, the result would have been different. But at the same time, it was still, you know, pretty amazing to see. But that Spanish team was one to be reckoned with, and they always gave the United States a problem and a run for that gold medal.
Yeah, you said that you also competed with the US. Was it, I would say, experience, not only looking at all of these stars, but who was your favorite of the guys who played maybe on that Olympics? And was it Kobe, who was, I would say, the undisputed leader in the Alpha Dog? Was it, I would say, looking at LeBron and other guys? KD also, I would say, played in 2012. Like, who was most mesmerizing for you? Also, Carmelo Anthony is considered, I would say, the greatest Olympian by the Team USA. Like, who is somebody that you remember, I would say, being the dominant?
I'll tell you this. One thing I remember from that team is they put a lineup out there that consisted of Carmelo Anthony, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, and Andre Iguodala. And I remember the point guard, our point guard was 38 years old at the time. And he looked at me and was like, who did I want him to guard? I said, Nate, it does not matter. It's about to get ugly because, LeBron played all 5 positions that game. He was guarding the point guard, our shooting guard. We guarded the wild thing. He was guarding me. He played the 5 position. And I think what was so great about that team was 1 through 15, like they had Hall of Famers on that team. Like Russell Westbrook was the 3rd point guard on that team. So imagine that. So for me, I think that lineup that they put out there just spoke to that team's greatness, that they could put five guys 6'7" and above on the court and have no drop off and actually be their most impactful lineup. Just spoke volumes to the skill and the talent on that team. And, they're definitely one to be reckoned with 2008 and even the 1992 Dream Team too. So my fondest memory was getting the opportunity to put on the jersey to play against that team and represent my country on that level. So, there was a number of exciting moments, but just having the opportunity to do that on British soil was amazing.
Yeah, I can only imagine, I would say. And I would say now, after you concluded your career, you mentioned that you went into some executive roles. You mentioned that you now work with the Knicks. But one thing that I would say I really wanted to ask you about is that when you moved to front office, especially in the G League, I would say NBA is all the glamour and glitz, but G League is the grind. Like, how different it is, I would say, when you want to go through the G League path to either get a professional contract in the NBA or maybe to go overseas. Like, what do people, I would say, who follow basketball don't know about, I would say, the G League and the process and everything, all the ins and outs of it?
Yeah, I always tell players, first and foremost, that yes, I think if you're young and, still on the cusp of being an NBA player, giving the G League a shot for your first couple years is something that you should do. But you're a professional basketball player, and professional means it's your job, and your job means you have to put money in the bank. And the G League is a transition league where players that are on the cusp of being on an NBA roster go to develop, to continue to showcase their abilities so that teams, when they're ready, can call them up. It's the path that I took. It's the reason why I wanted to become an executive through the G League ranks, because my way back into the NBA was through the G League. When I was I played in the G League when I was in Dallas as an assignment player. Had a great time there, and I loved seeing the grind from that point of view. And then I was there just a year or two later as a player when I played in Austin for San Antonio's G League team, and it really gave me perspective on the levels to this game, and that seeing the grind of these players and how they compete and how they, approach their craft to just get an opportunity at playing in the NBA. I was playing on the team with players who were getting triple doubles, getting 20 rebounds, 20 assists, and, they weren't even getting a sniff at the league. So it showed you the level of talent that was in the NBA. Even if we look at the NBA now, some of the premier players on all of these teams were featured in the G League at one point.
Yeah.
If we look at Ben Shepherd from Indiana, you can look at Jace Walker from Jarris Walker from Indiana too. There's also there's one more player that I wanted to mention that was still playing. Isaiah Hartenstein from OKC. We not only had him in New York, but he was in the G League to start his career, and I believe that experience in the G League has allowed these players to be NBA ready when their number was called. And I think that's what allows some of these younger players, and we spoke about the high school players, to develop and shorten that curve when it comes to being NBA ready. So, I do love the G League. I do love what it represents. I do think you have to be strategic in your approach. Some guys, if you're in the G League for 5 years and, you still haven't gotten an opportunity, sometimes it may benefit you to go play in Europe and get and continue to put some money in the bank and improve. I always tell guys this: if wherever you are, we can see you. We're watching. We're watching. You may not be in the backyard of the New York Knicks like our G League team is, but you know, if you're playing in Spain and playing at a high level, you're going to, you know, you're going to get noticed. And the same thing has happened this year. There's a player in Paris. Is he in Paris? Yeah, in Paris, I believe, who you know, I think they're going to the EuroLeague Final Four. They were in the top 8 and got an offer for the Memphis Grizzlies, a guaranteed offer for the Memphis Grizzlies. His next contract in Europe is going to be 3 times that.
Yeah.
So now he's like, what do I do? Do I go and fulfill my dream of playing in the NBA and make significantly less money, or do I continue my path, my path, you know, in Europe, and knowing that I'm NBA worthy, continue my path, but also, you know, just you know, stay on that course. You know, it can be difficult at times, and for me, I bet on myself a lot. A lot of the times, I decided to, like you said, roster cuts. You know, try to go to training camp and make a team and challenge myself to do so. And 90% of the time, it worked out well for me. You know, I don't often recommend that to a lot of players. You know, I say if the money's on the table, if a good contract and opportunity is there, you take it. But I also respect it when they bet on themselves to go to training camp or, you know, be on an NBA team, because that's everybody's dream.
Yeah, I can agree. I agree with that fully. And maybe moving to G League again was, I would say, a big move in terms of you ended your professional career. Was it a big switch from you going from a pro player to now becoming, I would say, an executive?
I think it wasn't that difficult of a transition to me. I always tell guys who play professionally that you have a PhD in basketball. You have a PhD in basketball, your experience is invaluable. And I applied that experience to basketball operations and being an executive. I always just challenged myself to become the executive that I wanted to play for. You know, challenging myself to be the executive that I wanted to play for, and everything else I would learn. You know, I always felt like you didn't need 20 years of front office experience to do this job. You need the audacity and the respect to challenge the players, hold them accountable, but also, you know, use that player mindset to, you know, to make the best decisions for the team as well as for the players. So you know, I don't think it was a difficult transition for me. You know, I embraced it. I actually yearned for it. I actually really wanted to see, you know, how I would you know, how I would be as an executive, and I loved it. I loved it for my time there, and it was a great experience for me.
As a big basketball fan, I would say it's a dream job to work with. I would say maybe if you can't succeed as a maybe professional basketball player, but without basketball, I would say working for an NBA team in any capacity sounds like a dream job. But I would say to conclude our discussions, I want to talk about, I would say, something that I know that you're quite passionate about, that is your involvement in basketball initiatives in Africa, specifically in Ghana. You created the Seed Academy. So I would say, what is something like I know that your background, of course, has a lot of reasons why you're, I would say, investing that. But do you think that Africa and the talent in Africa is like Europe nowadays is considered that they overtook NBA? Do you think that in years to come that there will be more and more, I would say, athletes and basketball stars coming from Africa?
I think it's already happening. If you look at the NBA draft this year, or even look at the NCAA Final Four, there were 2 players from the NBA Academy in Africa in the Final Four. They're also in the NBA draft now and are pegged or dubbed to be, you know, top 10 or lottery picks. You know, I think the talent in Africa is now. I just think Africa lacks the infrastructure and the resources to develop that talent. You know, with me and Seed Academy Ghana, my goal is to provide an ecosystem for Ghana's youth to allow them to develop within the game, live their dream, through playing the game of basketball, but also if they want to, reach a certain level, they don't always have to go to academy in Europe or go to a high school in the United States. We want to be able to create that opportunity on African soil. So that's part of my purpose in Africa right now, because the talent is there. There's a reason why, there's an academy, the NBA Academy in Senegal. There's a reason why the NBA and FIBA invested in the Basketball Africa League, which is the first of its kind continent-wide league in Africa. Now there's hope. There's more hope for players who may not know how to get from, or may not have the opportunity to get from Ghana to the United States. Now they could pursue something on African soil. They can become a professional athlete and play on African soil, something that I would have loved to have done as a player. So, I do believe the not the next frontier, the frontier that's right now is in Africa, which is why I've invested my time and resources in building Africa up so that this younger generation can have those opportunities that, weren't present before.
Yeah, I would say one thing that also popped into my mind is you mentioned Ghana. Ghana is also known, I would say, as a soccer country. So are you again competing with soccer for the popularity?
Yeah, but it's nothing new for me. I did it as growing up in the UK, and now it's the same. But I think the great thing about basketball is that it's so engaging. Yeah. It's so engaging that anybody who comes to watch it is going to have a good time, whether it's watching the guys play, watching the players play, or the fan engagement that they have, when play stops. So that's the great thing about basketball. And I do feel like, and I know it's growing, and we just have to continue to give it more of a platform to grow adequately.
Yeah, and I would say this would be my last question. Given we went through your whole career, we also mentioned your executive role. Maybe how do you transition all this knowledge, I would say, to also helping, young African athletes through your academy?
How do this journey that I'm on in Ghana and Africa on a broader scale is a culmination of my knowledge and experience. Everything from when I started playing this game at 12 years old to, through to going to high school and college in the US, playing professionally in the NBA and Europe, being an executive. I'm applying all of that knowledge and experience to what I'm doing now, whether it's on the philanthropic side with Seed Academy Ghana, or on the business side with my infrastructure projects to build arenas and stadiums in Africa to help with the socioeconomic gap. So I'm applying all of that knowledge and utilizing all of that experience to move forward with this Africa journey.
Okay, great. Pops, really thank you. It's been, time flies, as they say. It was really a pleasure to have you. And I really want to wish you best of luck to you with the Seed Academy, also in your, I would say, position with the Knicks. And let's see if you'll be right with the Knicks, I would say, being the champions this season.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, for sure. Right. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Have a good one.